Welcome back to another Growth Support Conversation. My name is Neil, and today I have a bit of a different one for you. I'm really excited. Today I'm joined by actually my CEO and co-founder, Nando Steenhuis, to talk about something that I think will be very interesting for everybody to see a little bit of a different perspective on, which is better understanding business and really being able to become a better business partner as a support leader and as part of that organization. But before we dive into it, Nando, do you want to introduce yourself and let people know a little bit about your background and where you're coming from?
Of course, I hope I can impress with that. So my background, there's not a very long history. So AIHR, the Academy to Innovate HR, is the company that started together with Eric very shortly after we both graduated. So my background in that sense is mostly in studying, and there was something business related that. Most interesting things are in what I do nowadays, which is the most exciting job that I've ever had, I would say. So at AIHR at the moment, I'm responsible mostly for the day-to-day runnings of the company and growing the organization. We're a fast-growing organization. I think you joined when we were around 10 people or so. At the moment, check today, we're 98 people, so we're close to 100, so we're growing pretty fast. And my responsibility is in making sure that we continue to do that. From that capacity, all the leaders of the various departments report to me, including yourself. Anything that is not part of their responsibilities ends up on my plate. So that also fills my day realistically with quite some practicalities and things that simply need to get done. And whenever I have some white space in my calendar, I really like to work more on the marketing side and on the product side of our business. Get involved there and see what we can do to move the needle even further. But in general, we have a really amazing team. So more and more areas are places where I really need to stay out. The customer experience area is one of those where I'm not as involved because you're clearly much better at it than I am. And there's many of those areas within our organization.
Thank you for the intro and also kind words. Appreciate that. Just to set the tone a little bit in terms of kind of this, I would say, conversation that a lot of support leaders have around, being viewed as a cost center versus a value driver and all of these things. Just specifically speaking to customer support as a team and as a function, how do you view it from your perspective?
Well, we're also doing annual budgets, so of course there's a cost component to it. For our business specifically, I wouldn't say that this is one of the biggest cost centers and that it's really, it's not something that every year crosses my mind. Okay, let's see how we can optimize the support budget a bit, because in the grand scheme of things, we have a relatively limited support department. And typically, I think that's probably the case in most support organizations. You have more junior people working there. So the relative costs are also not astronomical. I do think, and also what we have seen, that there's good potential for support to not always be a cost center. There is a certain layer that is just part of the cost of goods sold. That's also how we budget it. Support is something, the more we sell, and we sell e-learning, the more customers we have buying our e-learning, the more support queries we have. So we know it's linked to, we sell more, we have more workload there. So to a certain extent, there is a cost component, and that's also how it comes through in our margins, in the financial side of all the calculations, the budgeting, the margins, etc. At the same time, I think there's some initiatives that we have done, some concrete ones, where we can also see how it drives value. So there is clear opportunity, or at least I have seen within our organization firsthand, how there's a possibility to shift that narrative quite a bit and find a more balanced view of it.
It makes a lot of sense. And I think you mentioned, across all departments and organizations, you're doing budgeting, and it's not necessarily the biggest cost center for organizations. And I think it's important to keep in mind that every department is responsible for managing those investments effectively and being able to actually make the most of what they have in that sense. And how would you say that the difference of finding that balance has gone in your experience, in terms of when a support leader comes to you or would go to their CEO, for example, how would you like that conversation to be approached, or what would be the best way to approach you?
The most important thing, and it's the same thing that we teach in HR as well, the core always comes back to link it to business outcomes. What are we trying to achieve as a company, and how can your department, in this case specifically, support organization, contribute to that growth? And I think that's the best starting point. Approaching, for speaking for myself, approaching me personally with a business case of we need more people, and we want to get our response time down from 24 hours to 18 hours, are not things that I would necessarily be receptive for, because it's unclear how they really help us achieve the business outcomes that we're looking for. And for us, those are much more around growth and renewability. So if a support leader would come and link their strategy to those things, that would be a great start, at least for starting the conversation with me.
I love that you mentioned some of those efficiency metrics. Like when you look at it, you're like, yeah, I don't necessarily see the connection between, we need to get our response times down, we need to get this down. There's a bit of a discussion around, what are actually those efficiency and operational metrics that are really important to us as support leaders versus what's actually important and speaks the language to the business, what you mentioned, connecting them to the actual outcomes in that sense. Important to measure, but not always the most important to communicate and relay back in that sense. When somebody is going to be showcasing their reporting, say they have a support report that comes out, they're going to be delivering that to you. Is there anything that you would specifically like to see in that report outside of just what exactly is going on?
Realistically, just being very honest, I think on the support side, you're more likely to have an issue than to really have something to celebrate in terms of the number of times it will occur. So what I'm looking for, and also the metrics that we were just discussing about, of course, they are important, but they're also, to a certain extent, they're hygiene levels. Like, you will not get complaints if your support time is under like 24 hours, and then getting it out to 18 or 16 will not make a big difference. Having it too high, it becomes problematic. It's the same like the Wi-Fi. No one ever celebrates that the Wi-Fi is working. You're laughing because we've had quite big issues at our office with Wi-Fi when we just moved in. You hear people complain when it's not working, and the complaints are very vocal and frequent. And the moment it starts working, one day later, people forget about that this was an issue, and they will not mention that it's now working so well. And that's how I see a lot of those metrics as well. They need to be within a certain margin, and as long as they're within that, it's good. So what I would then be looking for, okay, what are our problem areas at the moment? Is there any point, an executive summary, is there any point where we're operating outside of those areas? And then focus, unless that's the case, focus most of the other report on the initiatives that are being executed that are more aligned with the company goals.
Gotcha. So again, just really focusing on the maintenance and hygiene, making sure that what you do set as SLAs and really making sure that you're meeting those, keeping those up to date. In some cases, no news is good news in that sense. I always kind of laugh a little bit. There was a question that I saw somebody had pretty recently. It was like, how are you measured as a support leader for your performance? And I really wanted to answer it with like, well, when they don't hear anything from me, it's typically it's a really pretty good performance in that sense of like, if I'm not saying anything, there's no huge fires, then something's probably going pretty well in that sense. When it comes to looking at some of those things, one of those metrics that a lot of people focus on is customer satisfaction. How do you feel about CSAT in general?
Again, honest answer, as long as it's high enough, I don't have very specific feelings around it. At the moment, I wouldn't be able to quote you what our CSAT is. I remember it was high to such an extent that it's not a discussion topic for me because it doesn't feel like a problem area. What is our CSAT at the moment? Do you know?
Right now, we're sitting at 93%.
Yeah. Okay. So that was my expectation. If I would have to guess, I would say it's like 90% plus, and that's still the case.
Yeah. Yeah. Indeed. When it comes to, like, we talked about a little bit around, finding out which metrics are the right ones to be able to communicate. Some things aren't just not topics of discussion because they're running well, they're working well. Things are inevitably working fine in that sense. Would you see a difference of a founder who is really, really focused on a lot of these operational things, like really jumping in on these metrics and really finding out what's happening and what's going on, versus one like yourself that it's running fine and you have larger things to focus on? Have you found a difference of, kind of frame of thinking in that sense?
Yeah, 100%. Like, I think this is easy for me to recognize because when you started here and just a few years ago, we were a much smaller organization. So my role with regards to support was a lot closer to it. At the moment, we have you in the head of customer experience role. So that means that there's two levels of people in between it, yourself and a manager on the support side, that are already thinking more on the tactical and strategic level as well. And that has definitely shifted over the years. I think back in the days, we were still talking about some of the metrics that you are likely talking about with your team at the moment. So there, I can really see how our organization has grown. The support organization has matured. That also means that there's less frequent issues, and it allows me to focus on areas where there are things on fire.
Gotcha. Hey, that makes sense. The more you grow, the more kind of layers you get in the distance you have, the less that conversation on more operational things has to happen in that sense.
Yeah, I would say I'm still very receptive for it. Like, you often get a message from me like, hey, I saw this review, I saw this thing. So as the CEO of the company, but also, yeah, so mostly as the CEO of the company, I also just want to be proud of the product that we're delivering to people. And I would like every customer to be happy. So it does hit me when I see someone who's not happy, and I would like to then see how can we succeed at making that customer happy, or at least delivering the value that they were hoping to get and resolving the situation. I think those are the moments that I tend to be drawn into it a little bit more, and we look together at what happened and what can we do to solve it, and if there's any way we could even prevent those things in the future.
Yeah, that makes sense. These kind of spotted issues when they come up, or if you see something, you're like, hey, I want to dig into it. I want to find out. I always have that like intrinsic curiosity as well of like, hey, this thing happened. Let's go do a deep dive, check it out, see how we can make sure that it is working well and that it turns things around. You play a little bit undercover boss when you go look at those things and just say like, hey, how's it really going?
Exactly. It's interesting.
When you started AIHR with Eric and you were really starting things out, do you feel that the conversations that you were having with customers at that point is getting you a lot more information and detail that you really, really needed versus what you hear from customers and how you collect customer feedback now?
I think this is one of those areas that goes back to your first question about, is it a cost center, or how can we change that narrative? And this is one of the biggest areas of hidden value that I see, or a role that customer support can play. As we're growing, we're still iterating our proposition. And we have a B2C business, we have a B2B business. We continuously want to learn about what do our customers like, what are the problems that they're running into. And to me, support is one of the most important channels to learn that. When we just got started, Eric was the one who was also creating the e-learning. I was the one who was also doing support on the side, and I was literally just getting first-hand information from customers, how they were responding to certain things in our proposition, in the offering that we had on our website, the problems, that the bottlenecks that they were running into in the purchasing process. And all that information is golden. Like, that is the stuff that we always need to make sure that gets to the team managing the website that comes back to the team that's actually developing our training courses and the platform. And when that feedback loop is done well, then you get to the point where the support organization is driving a ton of value, because there are insights there that you just cannot get any other way. I was also, until relatively recently, there were some emails being sent from my name to gather feedback, for instance, on people renewing and not renewing. And that is the feedback in the support organization that you get continuously. And for me, that was such relevant and important feedback, so valuable, that I wanted to just make sure it landed in my inbox. And I was happy to answer the responses that I got to those emails as well. So my access to the type of information has changed. The relevance of the type of information hasn't. It has become easier to spot patterns in it because we just have more volume. Back in the days, we needed to learn from maybe 50 emails a week. Now we can learn from hundreds of emails a week. You probably know the accurate number there. So it's much easier to spot the patterns, and you learn a lot quicker. And once you've had 100 people comment about a certain thing, you kind of know what they're looking for.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense now that you have a bit more of an overview. And I love what you say, like you really want that information. You really want to be able to see it, so much so that you just have it going to your own inbox because it's that relevant, and you're happy to take it in that sense. I think one of the things that has become a much more common conversation around doing well is this feedback loop of closing, really raising the voice of the customer. And that's where a lot of people have started really focusing a little bit less on these operational metrics and a little bit more towards VOC, to be able to close that feedback loop in a sense. If, from your perspective, if somebody were to say, okay, we're only going to report on customer insights now, not necessarily these really operational metrics, and start to be able to blend them and close the bridge a little bit, what would you want to see out of that report as a founder?
Insights and takeaways, like not necessarily the raw data, but the translation from these are specific things that we've heard, and this is what we feel it means for our organization. We're hearing that people have continuous problems logging in and managing their subscription and payment details. We believe that this is hurting our renewal rate, and we feel that we need to make it easier for our members to manage their billing details. Like those type of outcomes. And the biggest comment that I would typically ask with those things, like how big is this problem? Like, is this 10% of all of our support queries? Like if we would make a top 3 out of our problems, what would that look like? So really that's relative relevance of the different opportunities or things that we're hearing is very important. And that's also often when we bring these things back to our leadership team and we say our members, we're hearing through support that our members want shorter courses. The first question is going to be like, yeah, but how many members said that? Like, is it 5 people in a quarter, or is this like hundreds of people that are saying it?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you have a very vocal minority of customers in that sense, if it's few and far between, is that really going to impact the direction of the strategy or not, or what we're going to be working on in terms of a focus? You really want to make sure that it is time well spent on the most important things that are being connected back to that why of the organization. And I think now we're kind of getting into, we talked about why we want to connect those to organizational outcomes and business outcomes to start bridging that gap between, support as a cost center to a value driver. What are the things we're reporting on now, and how VOC can at least start to kind of bridge that gap a little bit to kind of connect those things to outcomes? Because we have volume, we know what people are talking about, but how does that actually translate into the business and the organization? I think that's how you can kind of start to create this path and bridge upwards.
Yeah, fully agree. That I think this is probably for any support organization one of the biggest things where they can add value. I can imagine, of course, if you're in a much larger organization, the proposition is a lot more defined. But there are still like the things that your team is spending the most time on are probably the areas where there's room for improvement or there's opportunities to grow.
Definitely. And I think one of the things as well is customer insights is one way that support has become a value driver in that sense. And sometimes what a lot of organizations are doing now, especially in SaaS, for example, is to create tiered and paid supports, premium support in a sense as well, to kind of start finding this balance between cost and value. Is that something that you've ever considered or looked at or thought about?
I have the feeling that it's more of a thing on the B2B side, the business to business side of our business. And that's also where you typically see it. If as an organization we're buying a software solution, then the SLA could be one of the things listed in some of the plans. And one plan only has the 24-hour email support, and the other one has the direct phone support. I have not seen that as much personally on the B2C side of subscriptions, where I have the feeling that this is one of those other areas where you can use support to differentiate yourself. Like in the Netherlands, we have this big online retailer where you can buy electronics. They're quite known here, so people from the Netherlands listening probably know which organization I'm talking about, but they're really known for excellent support. So if I want to return something, I don't have the box anymore, I accidentally scratched it, or I'm actually too late returning it, I know that with this organization is not going to be a problem. And that is the reason why I always order my electronics with them, because I know it's going to be a lot easier if there's an off chance that I end up buying something that I don't like or that's broken. And I'm 100% sure it will not cause me any troubles. And I know I'm spending a little bit more for that. So it has become, for them, it has really become part of their branding as an organization. It has been one of the USPs why I buy from them. For our specific organization, that's maybe a little bit less, but if people know that when they sign up for AIHR and that our 60-day money back guarantee is really a 60-day money back guarantee, and even if there's a different situation, we will always do our best to offer the most constructive support and just work out a good solution, then that does lower the barrier to purchase. Like, you will be more likely to purchase because you trust your organization. And I think in order to really leverage that, you need to make it it needs to be a big thing, and it needs to come across in your branding. That's not something we are doing. But for support organizations, I think that is an area where you can really shine. I think in the Netherlands, every year people tend to switch utility companies, and they all have terrible support, probably to make it as difficult as possible for you to switch to another provider. But like, if there were to be one that has really great support, I think that would be, for me, a USP to choose that organization over another one. And if you manage to get there, your support organization essentially, worst case, it's just break even, but it might actually be making your money. Like, every minute you spend on the phone and making a customer happy and give that experience, they might actually mention it to someone else.
Yeah, indeed. And I think you're trying to find the balance of really promoting it and building it as a USP, and really, making sure that it's done really, really well is more valuable than just having people pay for it in that sense. And if you can raise all of those customer insights back into the organization through what we talked about before, you can make it valuable enough to really, really warrant that cycle of continuous value throughout the organization.
Yeah, and that's a good way of looping it back to your question, because I wasn't fully answering that. But next to that, so why would you want to ask money for it if you feel this is a USP for your organization? At the same time, I personally also feel that as an organization, you have a responsibility to deliver the best support that you can. Like, is there truly anyone leading a company that doesn't want their customers to be helped properly? Then they probably need to be looking for a different leader for the organization. But I feel that as a company and as a leader of company, you should feel that responsibility. If someone purchases from you, they committed to you. You should be committing to them and give them the support that they need, and not really start tiering that in terms of you're only paying €1,000 per year, so you need to wait 3 days for an answer to your question.
That's well said. You know, it's I think having a mutual level of responsibility for whether it's just a transaction or a relationship that you're building is I think a core responsibility that every organization should have, and being able to build a relationship and a perspective around that for what you mentioned. You know, maybe if leaders aren't focused on that or don't want that, maybe you're not necessarily building the right culture within your organization. I think building a culture within an organization around customer centricity is also one of these kinds of topics that come up quite a lot around, you know, how can you say that your company is really customer centric if you're doing certain things, like if you're not being able to build certain functionalities or user rights, which kind of goes into, you know, purposeful friction versus not in the customer journey and experience. But outside of that, how do you think that organizations or support leaders could take a lead in creating that customer-centric culture within an organization?
That's a really good question. Like, ideally, you can make the business case for it. You can, if you can showcase that having more or being more customer centric increases renewability, helps people to renew their subscription rather than cancel it, then it will be quite easy to get the attention of the people that you need to get it from. But it's a tricky one. I think if something is if it ain't there, it's probably very difficult to change that mindset, and likely it has also taken years to remove the customer centricity from that organization. So that means that already for years something was not going super well. If you're not focused on the customer, what are you focused on then? Tearing your support so that you can make a few euros more money. Like that's also playing the short-term game as an organization. So I would say that if you're in this position, there's probably bigger challenges in your organization, and as a support leader, you might want to question if you want to work for an organization where that is not customer centric by nature already.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if it has gotten to that point, it's probably been a long festering issue for a long time. Around building a culture of customer centricity within an organization, there have been a few comments I've seen quite recently, which I would love to touch on while we're here, which is that customer support is an all-company sport, around having an all-hands support kind of model, which works for some organizations, but just kind of getting everybody involved in it. Would you think that getting people involved in it would be worth their time?
Yeah, 100%. Maybe that's also a little bit the question or the answer to your previous question, like what can you do to get more people involved in it? It's that feedback loop, sharing like the feedback that we're getting from customers, that the reviews that we're collecting, both positive and negative, and being really transparent about that, because I think that really resonates with people. And ultimately everyone is in an organization wants to have an impact, especially with the newer generations. You see that a lot more. It's much more important for them. Sorry, that the impact of their work is clear. And this really fits very well with that movement, like bringing the feedback from the customer more into the organization makes it very clear for everyone in that organization, who are we actually doing all of this for, and how is what we are doing in our department or our team impacting that customer. So really sharing, very proactively sharing it. What I would love, like we have an office here, we have these big TVs in every room. I would love for one day to have a dashboard on there again, where we just continuously showcase the feedback that we're receiving on the different channels where we're receiving it, and showing the reasons for why people are requesting a refund, so that everyone in the organization can see these things and can think along in terms of how we can be solving these problems, and in doing that become much more customer centric.
Well, I know what I'm doing when I get back from holiday.
Good, looking forward to it.
But I think that's great, and like really getting people involved and visualizing across the board. I think the more you keep it top of mind in a continuous conversation, then the more you can build the muscle and build that relationship in a sense. And starting to think about, how to actually get that as a common conversation that happens rather than something that just happens when it needs to, or when there's an issue, or when something is happening, kind of really, keeping it top of mind, and kind of helping to drive the product direction or strategy as well.
Yeah, and I think what's very important there is accessibility of this information. If it's not being shared proactively, people probably are not looking for it, or it might be that they don't even have access for it. Like if you're working in an organization with a very closed support ecosystem, and essentially the CSATs and things are only reported on a board level and no one ever hears about it, like there's literally no opportunity for people to become customer centric. So the more you lower that threshold for accessibility, and to me the ultimate form of that is having a dashboard in every single room where just continuously you see things pouring in. You're just drawn into it. Like the accessibility of the information just becomes bigger and bigger, essentially. That you bridge the gap between each individual and the customer.
Yeah, indeed. And I mean, I think that also puts a little bit of a layer of transparency and accountability for the customer experience then as well, right? If you're putting it in people's faces all the time, somebody sees a situation or a reason or something that happened, they come and ask you, they're like, hey, what happened with this one? Then there's a little bit of a layer of, hey, we really need to make sure that we're on top of it and providing the best experience possible.
Yeah. And it might also work the other way, because like you also know that a lot of feedback that we're getting is actually very positive. Most people in our organization are missing out on all that positive stuff. So also for them to just see on an everyday basis, like, oh, wow, hey, this person is mentioning this project that I worked on and that they're very happy with it. And that for them, it's a reason why they're recommending AI chart to a colleague or to a friend. Like those are amazing moments of recognition that the closer you get people through the customer, the more likely that will happen, yeah, by default, without us as managers needing to take that information and then conveying it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, there's one thing around, like we have also a member feedback channel, for example, in our Slack, where we're just trying to constantly share more and more and more feedback on a regular basis and continue to drive it within the organization. But what you mentioned is a great thing, because it's not, customer insights and feedback doesn't always have to be around problem areas. It can also be around things that work really, really well that maybe we want to keep doing or do more of, in that sense, to be able to, narrow down and focus our efforts in the places where we can really maximize value in that sense.
Yeah, couldn't agree more on that.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts around some of these topics. I think a couple of things that we talked about, just to kind of sum it up and bring it full circle in that sense, is that realistically, when it comes down to it, those operational metrics are important to measure as a hygiene factor, and really to make sure that things are running smoothly, and to keep in mind if we're out of bounds or things like that, to bring them in. But really what we should be doing is focusing on what are the actual challenges of the organization and linking our activities and what we're doing back into the business based on those problems, and seeing how we can help support those. If we really want to become a business partner, we need to be able to focus and align on the same problems. One of the ways that we can do that is to raise those customer insights in a well-informed way and close the feedback loop, to be able to bring that insight and direction back into the organization. Hey, we solved these biggest problems, and then continue to build the best experience possible and lower the entry barrier for people getting these insights, make them more accessible, put them in people's faces, get people involved in that sense, to create a more customer-centric culture. Anything I missed? Anything you want to add?
I think the biggest thing I want to highlight in all of that is that we often talk about it as if there's things that are going wrong and we need all that information so that we can fix them. And that last thing that we were talking about, there's also so much positivity in this feedback loop that we can be creating. Like that might be even more powerful, actually, like knowing what our customers really like about what we're doing might be even more powerful than knowing what they don't like about what we're doing, or at least as powerful. And I think that's also very important in reframing support as an organization. It's not just focused on minimizing downsides, but there's also actually a lot of opportunity for upsides and positivity around all of these topics.
I love it. This is a really great highlight and a really great addition. And really creating, celebrating. I mean, celebrate and celebrate often, right? You're as an organization, you want to hear about those wins. You want to hear about the things that are going really, really well, and highlight those, like what you mentioned before. That's the reason why you also talked to all these customers at the beginning and got those renewal things. You want to hear about the things that are going really well. You want to see every customer happy and have that great experience, and it makes you feel good when it does happen. So
Exactly. That's what we want to be creating. And I must say, I'm a bit jealous that you're more in the front line of that and have that experience more often than I have it.
Well, thanks. Well, hey, you can all hands support jump in whenever you want. In all seriousness, thank you so much for your thoughts and sharing your perspective. I would say from the other side, but we're in the same boat. So, in that sense, thank you so much. I have one last question, which I like to ask everybody, just to see and try to get the culture of learning and growth there. And the question that I always ask is, if you had one thing across the course of your career, your professional experience, or even just life in that sense, if there's one thing that you've learned that you really stick to today, that you really hold to.
Wow. I wasn't expecting this question. If I need to answer it from the top of my head, is it something that I've learned? No. Is it something that's particularly relevant to what we're discussing? Absolutely not. But it comes down to grit and determination. Like, whatever you want to achieve, it's possible as long as the effort is being spent in it and being vocal about it, what you want to be achieving. I think that's for anyone who's listening, they probably all have a job, whatever job you have. I think that's something that works everywhere and that I've also seen succeed within our organization.
I love it. And definitely something that you see quite a lot. I will highlight, for example, that the reason why I asked that question as well, or try to keep it something that maybe is a little bit like fresh in that sense, where you're like, oh, I didn't think about it. That is specifically because I have the feeling that the first thing that comes to your mind, it really is that thing that you hold to in that sense, and that thing that really stands out above all else if it is on the spot. And if you have a lot of time to prep, then maybe it's not the most authentic thing or just the thing you want to share. So thank you for sharing that. And I really appreciate it. And yeah, I will say grit and determination is a core skill that I think that everybody should build as a muscle, if possible, because anything you think is definitely achievable.
Thank you for having me, Neil. It was an absolute pleasure that as a non-support person, I'm being asked to share some about it. I hope some of the things were on point, and I really appreciate the invite.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really love it.